Hi, my name is Alex Casano and I'm the events coordinator here at the Clearwater Historical Society. And today we'll be having Trudy Kelly. Trudy is an author of 2 books, one about the history of the historic Fenway Hotel and the other about the history of Dunedin. It's called Dunedin, Its History and Its Charm. So I hope you enjoy this presentation about Dunedin's history. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. My name is Trudy Kelly, and I'm the author of 2 books that I'm going to talk to you about. But I want to thank the people who came today and those that are tuning in. I appreciate you coming to hear about my books. I've written 2 books, published them. One is about the Fenway Hotel, and one is about Dunedin. And I have to talk about both of them because actually writing this book led to this book. I was the librarian when Schiller was at the Fenway, and I became so interested in the hotel. I'd walk into that hotel and just feel the history that was there. And I became very curious, so I was able to find articles, all kinds of pictures. People gave me things, so I ended up with quite a lot of information. Well, the Fenway was sold, and they moved, the Schiller moved to Largo. But I was still interested in the hotel, and I thought, what am I going to do with all this stuff? So I started writing. Never called it a book, never dreamed of writing a book, but finally, when I had enough pages, it sounded like it was going to be a book. And in doing the Fenway Hotel, I also found out a lot about Dunedin. So that's what led to this book. So let's take a look at some of the things about the Fenway that might interest you. And there's the book. I named it the Fenway Hotel, the Grand Lady of Dunedin. But then the man that helped publish it, get it ready to be published, he worked on all the pictures and worked on the text. He liked something after that, and I liked the alliteration of her struggles, success, and survival, because she did survive. I'm saying she, the hotel, I'm calling it a she. Okay, early in the 1920s, a group of residents felt that they were falling behind and they needed a hotel. And that's about when a lot of the hotels were starting to be built in St. Petersburg, here in Clearwater, the Harrison Hotel. So it was the residents. It wasn't some rich man from the north that came down like in St. Petersburg and built the hotel. It was the residents. And of course, they wanted people to donate $100 each, and they needed $300,000 to build this hotel. And there was an ad in the Dunedin Times in 1924, and it described the hotel as a fantastic luxury hotel. Why was it named the Fenway? Everybody asked me, does it have anything to do with the Fenway in Boston? The Fenway, what is it? The Fenway something? What is it? The baseball, the field, Fenway Park in Boston. But it's because it was located in an area that was called Fenway on the Bay. And actually it's low land covered wholly or partially with water, a boggy land or a marsh. So that's why it was called the Fenway Hotel. It did have a rough start. It was the year of the Depression, World War I. So there were 4 men, George Bowles, McQueen, White, Durand, Wendell, and Armston. They were the main stockholders. But the group lacked the funds to complete the hotel. So in August of 1925, George Bowles paid $250,000 to buy a controlling interest and had the hotel finished. That was the first radio station in Pinellas County. He purchased the radio station from Atlanta, and it was brought here. He hired a director of broadcasting. The radio station had the initials of George Bowles, WGHB, his initials, and began broadcasting in 1925. It was the first radio station, as I said, and early photos of the Fenway Hotel show the radio tower. And it was on the 3rd floor, so anybody who was going to be taped had to climb up a ladder, which wasn't very, it was kind of dangerous, but finally they made a nice radio station down on the 3rd floor. The next person that ran the hotel actually leased it in 1925 or 26 to 1929. He was a hotel and resort owner of a Hotel Alpine in North Woodstock in New Hampshire. Back then, the hotels were only opened in the winter, the season, because there was no air conditioning. So many of the people that worked in the hotels would go up north during the summertime and work there, and then come down here in the winter. In November, payments hadn't been made on the furnishings, so they took them out and the hotel closed for 2 years. The next 2 owners were the ones that really made the hotel flourish. It was James McGill. He lived in Indiana, had a business up there, and he was down here for his health. And he was going to play golf or something, went past the hotel, saw it was for sale, thought it was a good deal, so he bought it. And his son-in-law, C.T. Charles Scanlon, actually ran it. And they were the perfect people to do this. The daughter later on was interviewed, and she said they knew what the people liked. I mean, they had entertainment. They had, of course, good food. They would take people fishing. They would take them on boats. They would take them all over the place. So they knew, and they had dances, they had music. So it was a wonderful, wonderful time. They spent $160,000 in repairs and to renovate it. And it took 3 years until the hotel broke even. The most profitable year was they earned $50,000. And it was a first-class establishment that catered to the rich. When you stayed at the Fenway, there were 116 rooms, a very large pier, and you can see where it was. They've since taken it down. But boats could pick the guests up and take them around the islands, and they could actually fish off the pier. A lot of entertainment, a lot of social life. We have a lot of the menus that were used there, and they had wonderful food. To stay at there, the dinner cost $2.50, lunch was $2, but it cost $20 a day American plan. And I believe that's a room with a private bath, 3 meals a day, cooked by a French chef. And at dinner, the guests were entertained by a 4-piece orchestra. People came and spent the whole season there. They would come with, in fact, they'd come with their maids, and they stayed at a different place behind the hotel. And then they depended on visitors coming year after year and staying. How they got there, most of them, was by railroad. The Atlantic coastline took them to the Dunedin Railroad Depot. They were picked up by a limousine because they didn't need cars. They could walk places, they were driven places, and by boat. Charles Scanlon, he purchased the hotel in 1945, which would have been the end of the war. And he decided it was, but 10 years later, in 1955, he decided to sell it. He felt that people were no longer wanting to come down and just sit on the porch and rock. They were going on cruises, they were doing different things, so he decided that it was time to sell. And he wanted to try something new, which he did. He did a lot of things after he sold it, including, I believe he was the president of one of the banks here. The next owner, let's see, was Marius Pochet. I kept saying it wrong, but it's Pochet? Oh, I've spelled it wrong there or here. Anyway, in 1956, he sold it to them. Interestingly, he owned the not the Sand Pearl, but the Clearwater Beach Hotel at one time, and then he bought the Fenway Hotel. The thing that he did, the first thing he did was add the swimming pool. It was the first swimming pool in Dunedin. And he also opened the hotel year-round. So maybe there was, I haven't looked it up, but maybe they added air conditioning. He tried to make a private club called the Fenway Club for members of the Dunedin, but they usually couldn't, they mostly couldn't afford it, and in 5 years it failed. So he sold it, or no, Richard Blair actually leased it, and with an option to buy. And then the next year he did purchase it. So 59 he leased, 60 he purchased. What he introduced was very interesting. It was called a lifetime residency program or a retirement plan of the Fenway Hotel. What it was is people who were retired could move there, have their meals, have nurses, have special diets, go all over the place. But for some reason that didn't work out. I don't know why, because it actually sounds like some of the places that we have now for seniors. All services and meals, it costs $275 a month. And I think I put that in terms of what it was this year, and it was like $1,000 or something. And of course, if you were a couple, it would be very expensive. But he wasn't able to make it financially. So the next owners, you all might realize, was Trinity College. And in 1961, Fenway was sold to Trinity College for $250,000. That was their fourth location. They had moved all over, and their latest one was Bel Air, but they had grown out of it. So they stayed there until 1988, and land was given to them in Trinity. It was kind of ironic that it was Trinity, and they were Trinity, but he moved there. And of course, Dr. Billy Graham is Trinity's most famous graduate. Now, they had it sold. They kept, even before they moved, people were looking at it, and they had it sold to a couple, but it was vacant for how many years? 3 years. Because it didn't work out that this couple, because of the zoning, they wanted to make a retirement home. Because of the location of the Fenway in the neighborhood, it was zoned for a school, church, or hospital. And of course, you'd have to go through and have the land rezoned and stuff. But for some reason, I don't know why, I have a feeling they didn't trust these people. They thought maybe it was people from Clearwater coming over there, the Scientologists. I don't know what the reason was. But anyway, a lot of things were suggested for it. The Dunedin City Hall, apparently they were at 2 or 3 locations, so they looked at it, but it was going to cost way too much for them to fix it up. Townhouses, condos, they thought they could sell it to the Toronto Blue Jays, but they didn't want to get into the hospitality. Community Arts Center, a luxury hotel, but what happened next? 1991, Schiller, and that's where I kind of came in because I was librarian there. Schiller, Dr. Liebrecht had been looking all over. At this time, he had 7 campuses all over: Germany, France, Switzerland, London, and Spain. So he wanted something in the United States. So he had been all over. I'd heard the story in Boston. He came down the ramp. That was back when they had ramps, and it was very cold, and he said no. But the minute he hit Florida and saw the hotel, he thought this is the place to have his students come. It was perfect. It was near a small town. The weather was wonderful. So he bought it, and of course they put a lot of money into it. His first school was in Heidelberg, Germany, and he was German. His story is interesting. He had come here to Oxford and another school to teach, and he just loved the way the Americans taught, how they were they made friends with the students, they helped the students. So he decided to have these schools all over. They were all English speaking. A lot of the diplomats' children went there, and a lot of when the universities would have where they could go to another university and take classes there, so they had that going. But it was a very interesting man and just far-sighted, and when you went to the classes, there were students from all over. It was like a little UN, and they could talk, argue, whatever, discuss the differences in their countries. So it was a very interesting. Now, and they moved because it had gotten too expensive. It needed a lot of work done. So they moved to Largo, where right across from where the library is. So that's Schiller. George Radert decided to buy it. I don't know if you're familiar with George. He had done a lot in St. Petersburg. He's a lawyer, and every time you see something, they have to say they have to say that he's a lawyer for the city maybe. But he ran in. He thought he was a shoo-in. Somebody had given the idea that, oh, this is great. He'll make it. He said at a meeting, he said, I've fallen in love with your hotel. And but he ran into all kinds of problems. The neighbors were happy at first, and then they started looking at what he had planned, and that's not what they liked. The zoning, the neighbors didn't like it. They kept, he had to go to the meetings a lot. Finally, he got permission, and by then his financial backers were, it was, what year would it have been, in 2000, where the financial stuff had gone down. So during this time it was empty, and they knew that people were getting in, and it wasn't a good idea. So the next step, there were two groups, the Tai Chi, and then there was a couple from Pennsylvania, James and Christy Bauer, a father and daughter who had done a lot with hotels and refurbishing. They actually wanted to take the hotel down. They thought it was too far gone, too dangerous to do it. So they had planned to take it down but build another Fenway hotel. They call it the Fenway, looked like the Fenway. And they actually had a handshake. They were in, according to the newspaper, but all of a sudden the Tai Chi group had won the bid for the hotel. They wanted to be their national headquarters and international conference center, and they planned to spend about $5 million to restore it. But I think they realized, because they didn't have that many meetings coming in, so they actually sold part of the property. They still own the back part, which they have the meetings. And from what I understand, 2 weeks out of the year, the Fenway just rents out to the people coming to their meetings. So that was great, and they did start the renovation. But then all of a sudden, in 2017, they transferred 3,000 acres of the property, which included the hotel, over to the Mainsail Lodging and Development. They have some the Marriott. They have some deal with the Marriott, but they do these autograph hotels, and they went in and they've done a beautiful job. If you've ever gone there to see or to eat, they hope. In fact, 3 times people hope to get it on the list of the historical properties, and they in fact they had a company that did it, and I kind of helped them with it. But the reason they didn't get it is because they put that rooftop bar, and they put this new thing that came out in the front that people could drive under. So when you do stuff to the outside of the building, it no longer becomes a historical building. So that's about the Fenway. Oh, these are some pictures here. That's when it was. And there's Schiller. I took that picture. I love it. And then that's the current hotel. That actually isn't the actual. It was the, what do you want to say, the artist's rendition. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Dunedin. Like I said, when I was writing the Fenway Hotel book, it kind of got me into the history of Dunedin, which I felt was very interesting. But the other thing is, when I take the Fenway book to a couple of the places that were selling it in downtown Dunedin, they said, we need a new book, a new history of Dunedin. The one that's most comprehension had been 40 years old. And it was difficult because there was no index, and I used that as one of my references, but it needed to be updated. So I thought, well, let's try it. And luckily, the chapters kind of went into place. And I'll show you what the chapters are. There's Welcome to Dunedin. Okay, of course, the beginning, the commerce, the churches, the first 4 churches that were at the... And that was a big thing back in the day with the settlers. The first thing they needed, besides getting their land ready, they needed to get together and praise the Lord for a good week and good crops and all. So churches were very important. The citrus industry, and you know that blossomed. Early communication, that goes from just talking to each other to then, phones and all the things that I brought it up to in the history, brought it up to what's going on now. Transportation, walking was the first, and then, of course, horses, mules, boats, the whole thing. The barrier islands, early lodging, and that, of course, included the Fenway. Education, the library, golf, and that's a biggie. Recreation and sports, healthcare, World War II and military, first and today. So I'm going to take you into just a couple of these. I don't want to go through all of the chapters, but some that I thought was really very interesting. Okay, the beginning of Dunedin. Well, Florida became a state in 1845, and the first settler that actually had a land deed was in 1848, and that was Richard Leroy Garrison. He's the one that they said was the first settler. But there were other people that called squatters that had been on the land, and they actually could buy the land for $1.25 an acre if no one else had a claim on it. The land was given to Garrison because he had fought in the Florida Indian War and as a reward for military service. How Dunedin got its name. This is kind of interesting. The first general store was opened by George L. Jones in 1870, and it became known as Jonesboro. And two Scotsmen moved in, John Douglas and James Somerville, and they also had a store, but they petitioned the post office and they requested the name Dunedin. So once the government said okay, then it was Dunedin. They actually put the name Dunedin on their store. And Dunedin is a Gaelic name for Edinburgh, means peaceful rest. Dunedin became incorporated in 1898, and believe it or not, it was because of pigs. They had pigs running all the way through the town, and they would get under the fences, under the schools, making a lot of noise. And so by incorporating them, they could say that's against the law. But the sheriff didn't want to get into too much trouble. They would take the pigs and put them in a pen, but the people that owned them would come and take them. So it wasn't, I don't know, it was supposedly supposed to work. Some of the history, Dunedin actually claims to be the oldest town established on the west coast between Cedar Key and Key West. But Clearwater has challenged this claim. And I guess it had to do with the trading in the area, who did the most trading, and I think Dunedin might have had a dock to come to. So I don't know, they could argue it out. But at one point, Dunedin wasn't growing as fast as the other towns, and there were two problems. I thought maybe they're the same one, but I don't think they are. A few men owned a lot of the property, but priced it so high nobody could buy it, so they'd go elsewhere. The other thing was there were some wealthy people from the north that would come down. They owned the land. They didn't want their fun. They enjoyed coming down, fishing. They didn't want to not want any development to take away from coming here to hunt. So maybe having the hotel helped them. Land and food for everyone. This is part of the book here. Early settlers arrive in Florida. When early settlers came to Florida, some were seeking adventure, some were seeking a better life. In the early days, all the land was owned by the government and state, so settlers could come to this area and claim a parcel of land and secure a title. When settlers arrived, their first task was to lay out a road to access their land. Then they cleared the land to build a cabin and get the land ready for planting. Dunedin was settled mostly by people from Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Scotland, and England. Most of the early settlers started out as subsistent farmers, growing and catching their own food. Gardens needed to be planted as soon as possible. Some of the crops grown were watermelon, sweet potatoes, and oranges. Some settlers raised livestock, such as cattle and pigs. So the land, there were three ways to own the land. One was the Bounty Law Act of 1850, and I think that's how Garrison got his land. Squatters' rights, and I told you about that. They could, if they were there, they could pay $1.25. And then there was a Federal Homestead Act of 1852. Some of the things that they could do, so I said there's food for everyone. There was wild game, fish, and then of course they grew vegetables, watermelon, sweet potatoes, cotton, because some of them were from from Georgia, and they raised chickens, pigs, cows, and cattle. I'm assuming cows were for the butter and milk, where the cattle was for beef. Let's see. Citrus industry. They found out, they were growing a lot of things, but they found out that the land here was perfect for citrus. Let's see. The sandy soil and subtropical climate made Dunedin perfect for growing citrus trees. Now, we always think of oranges, but there's tangerines, grapefruit, and different kinds of grapefruit, different kinds of oranges. Now, there was the Skinner family. There was L.B. Skinner. He invented a machine to wash, polish, and pack fruit by size. Because they used to just put everything in one. Well, they had something before they had the nice boxes, the crates that we all know of with the beautiful sides and beautiful pictures. But they would just put them in something, and they were all different sizes. They were dirty. So he invented a machine that would wash them, polish them, and then they packed them by size. His son, B.C. Skinner, invented orange juice concentrate. Back then, it isn't the concentrate we know of. The first concentrate was a 10-to-1 concentrate, and they would put it in a big tin can, huge can. But it wasn't that good. But during World War II, the UK was having a real shortage, and people were getting sick because they had a vitamin C shortage. So the government paid them to send all this concentrate over to the UK, which was very nice. After that, now he invented that. The hard thing was to cook it down. You didn't want to lose the vitamins, so he figured out a way so that he could get it concentrated where you'd add 10 parts to the one of the orange concentrate. But the frozen orange concentrate was invented in Lakeland. It was produced in Dunedin, and that was a 4-to-1 concentrate. Same idea, but I think they added orange peel. What was nice about orange concentrate was that you no longer had to squeeze oranges. The housewives of America no longer had to do it. They had to wait to do the frozen concentrate until they could have frozen. They had invented refrigeration and frozen trucks, etc. But the smaller cans reduced shipping space, of course. They could use imperfect oranges because they had to have perfect oranges, so if some oranges weren't perfect, they could use those in the concentrate. And when there was a freeze, which quite often there was, oranges could be picked quickly and made into concentrate. Because if they froze and defrosted, they couldn't be sold as fresh. And when there were a large amount of oranges, the concentrate could be stored. So it was sent all over the country, and that's what I grew up on, the orange concentrate. My mother would get the can, and we would add the 4 cans, and that was our orange juice. B.C. Skinner was pioneer manufacturer of the frozen. It was first called Sun-Filled. In 1948, Sun-Filled sold to Snow Crop. 1954, Snow Crop sold to Minute Maid, and later Minute Maid sold to Coca-Cola. So there was quite a thing. And hopefully I have, oh, there we go. Here's the Skinner Manufacturing Company. They were right across the street from each other. And he also made other things that could be used, heaters that could be used when the frost was coming. He invented and made a lot of different things for the farmers to use, the orange farmers. And that's the orange concentrate plant. And I believe there was a fire there, and I don't have the date on that, but then they rebuilt and made the orange concentrate. Okay, the next subject is the barrier islands. Actually, it started out as one island called Hog Island, and the reason it was called Hog Island is that somebody had their hogs over there, the story goes, and that's where they stayed, probably bringing over the slop from the different hotels and stuff. And then there was a hurricane in 1921 and split the island in half, giving us 2 islands. First one is Honeymoon Island. I don't know if you've all heard the story of how it got named Honeymoon Island, but there was someone that bought the property and he wanted to sell it. He actually wanted to sell it for double what he paid for it. And he joked with an editor of Life magazine and said that it would be a perfect place for a honeymoon. So they started a contest. 50 couples could come for a 2-week stay. They could only be married less than 6 months, I believe. And they made these wooden huts, and many of the town groups built them. And the first couple came March of 1940. Now, from what I hear, it seemed like it was a long time, but it really wasn't. I'll tell you when it stopped. The huts had a double bed, a card table, 2 chairs, a pan, a kerosene lamp, because there was no electricity in the huts, 2 sets of utensils, dishes, and a rowboat. The island did have electricity in a recreational hall. There was a grocery store and a bathhouse with showers and toilets. There was an airstrip on the island, but most were brought by Seabiscuit, a boat that brought them over, a 31-foot cabin cruiser. It ended in 1941 after Pearl Harbor was attacked, but it was used then, the company used it to send there, because they were busy building stuff for the war, and it was a very, very stressful place to work. So they rented out the island for their workers to come and have rest and relaxation. But let's see. So the huts just became unusable, storms and everything. So in 1974, the state of Florida bought that island, or bought the land, and they made it the Honeymoon Island State Recreation Area. And then in 82, it was Honeymoon Island State Park. And it has a nature center. You can rent kayaks, fishing, swimming, bicycling, and a dog beach. Let me see the pictures here. That's Seabiscuit. And then some of the cottages. I think this is an old postcard. And it brought a lot of attention to Dunedin because, and they said Reagan and was it Wyatt wanted to come, but they had been married too long. What was Jane Wyatt was her name, Reagan's first wife. So brings nationwide publicity to the city. So they, that helped. And then the causeway was built to get out there, because before you could just go out by the boat and all. So the causeway came in and was in 1964. And that's a story in itself too, how that was built. Okay, Caladesi. Now the Caladesi was the other island, and the first settler that lived there was Harry Scherer, his wife and daughter. And there's a book that the daughter has written, My Life in Paradise. And Caladesi is Spanish for beautiful bayou. And you cannot get there by car or anything. You have to take a boat. And in 1968, it became a state park. So there's the boat that takes you out there. And you stay, and you can do all kinds of things out there. There's trails. You can see where the Scherer, am I saying that right? Scherer cottage was. And that's a really nice book to read. Okay, now we're into golf. The Dunedin Golf Course is the only golf course built by Donald Ross, who was a very well-known designer of golf courses, and the former home of the Professional Golf Association. In 1927, the first golf course in Dunedin was built. The city had planned to build one. Then all of a sudden, this man came through. He was from Michigan, and he had dreamed of this huge housing project, and he bought up a lot of property. He called it Dunedin Isles. They were going to have houses, swimming pools, bathing beaches, schools, maybe even horseback riding. But because of the time, it fell through. He went back to Michigan and did okay. I looked him up and looked up when he died, and so he even though he lost money here. And there's the story of how they sold the land off. But the golf course was abandoned when plans for Dunedin Isles fell through. But people kept coming in, the people from Dunedin kept coming in, mowing it and trying to keep it up. So eventually the city could take it over, and the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, which was right after the war, helped come and restore the course. And I think they did a lot of things in this area. I think they helped with the marina in Dunedin, and it put people to work back then. In 1943, the PGA, Professional Golf Association, came to Dunedin. And they assumed operating responsibility, and then in '61 they left. It was kind of a love-hate relationship, because the people that wanted to play, they couldn't play because the professionals were playing, and there would be all these things. So there were no tears when they left Dunedin, but they were here, and they had a lot of the big golfers come, and it kind of again put Dunedin on the map. So in 1963, after the PGA left, the city signed a 30-year lease to the Dunedin Country Club, and then they made a new. They've had 4 different clubhouses. The first one was some mansion, and then they had the second one. '63, they had a new clubhouse. But it had gotten so bad that they thought they'd fix it up, but they realized to repair it was more expensive than if they just built a new one, and that's the one that's here now. And, oops, I took out the current clubhouse. I had a picture of the current clubhouse. Okay, now we're into sports. And back in '46, the Lee B. Skinner Youth Center, and that was for the kids to come and play. There's a yacht club, and eventually the people that were the original yacht club people became so kind of just sitting around talking about it. So then I think it was the Dunedin Boat Club took over, and so the yacht club. Little League baseball teams, tennis, swimming, shuffleboard, parks, and playgrounds. So they really had a lot of things going on. And even baseball, the Buffalo Bisons were here and I believe that was from the Philadelphia. They were a minor league from the Philadelphia Phillies. And then, of course, the Dunedin Blue Jays in 1977. And they're still here. And different stadiums have been built for them and updated. Sailing was another thing that they did. And one of the big things, and it was actually... it was an 8-foot sailboat, and it was called a pram. And John has a pram, and I think we even own one here, pram. And the youth sailed and raced this sailboat. Very interesting story of how this was invented. One of the fathers of a gentleman that we know came up with an idea that they needed something like this to keep the kids busy. And of course, they always had the derby races, but those that were just twice a year, and there was not that many hills. So they challenged a woodworker to Mills. I can't remember his first name. Clark Mills, to come up with a boat that could be less than $50, made in a weekend, and that the kids could sail. And I think they even were going to have a sheet be the sail, but it wasn't. They had to have something else. It wasn't sturdy enough. So the youth sailed and raced the sailboat. And then they had a women's sailing club, and it was called the Windlasses, and I think they're still around too. Okay, now to healthcare in Dunedin. The first doctor that came was 1882, Dr. Jason Edgar. He also owned the drugstore, and he started the first newspaper in the area. And so a very interesting gentleman. But then in 1926, Dr. John Andrew Meese came to Dunedin because he heard they had the best water in Florida. So he was the doctor. He didn't always get paid in money. Quite often he'd get paid with a chicken or fruit, things from people's gardens. And it was when the the people would come down, they would pay with money. But in 1932, in the meantime, all the people had to go to Clearwater or Tampa for health care if they needed a hospital. So in 1932, a group of residents came, asked if he would help start a hospital in Dunedin, and they needed one. It was hard to go visit people to come all the way here to Morton Plant. So they offered to help build it if he would furnish the material. So he decided that he would do it, and I think he used a lot of his own money and asked for donations. And in 1937, 5 years after this group came, the Meese Hospital complex formally opened. And there's, of course, have been many expansions added. And let's see, what do I have next here? That's the original hospital. And then those are in June 2005, the Meese hospitals merged with the Morton Plant hospitals. And I didn't think I was aware of this, but the merged hospitals include the Morton Bay Hospital in Clearwater, the Morton Plant North Bay Hospital, Meese Countryside Hospital in Safety Harbor, and Meese Dunedin Hospital. So it makes sense to have them kind of not do the same thing in each hospital, kind of divide it up, have one specialize in certain things. Okay, World War II and the military. The Marines moved to the Dunedin Hotel in 1941, and that's when Pearl Harbor. And life changed in the United States and Dunedin. They had a lookout tower where people would come and look for, several defense volunteers watched for aircraft. And of course the big thing was Donald Roebling, who just lived a little bit down the road from here, the museum. He was the first production amphibious tractor, was assembled in Lakeland but tested in Dunedin. I believe every 10th one would come to Dunedin and they'd check it in the water. He invented the tractor in Clearwater and called it the Alligator because it would go on land and on water. And the story is he was a difficult child in school. He didn't like school, but he was brilliant. So his father had seen a lot of people die when there were floods in the Okefenokee. And so he challenged his son and said, could you figure out something that could go on land and go on water and save these people next time? Well, I guess it was in Life magazine, there was an article about it, and the Army picked up on it and got a hold of him. They were interested in it for military use. World War II was going on. It took us a while to get involved. We didn't want to get involved. World War I had been awful. So we kind of stood back until Pearl Harbor. But there had been this war going on, so the military was interested in the amphibious. And it did play an interesting role. My disappointment when I look it up, there's another man, but I believe somebody took his idea and did it a little differently. And he tried different... he had steel and then aluminum. It was too heavy. It was too this, too that. But it did play an important role in World War II, and he was given an award from President Truman. And it was precisely what was needed to transition fighting troops from sea to land. And you see it in these old movies where it comes up and they all come. So, and here's a picture of it, of one of them. There was one in Tampa, and then they moved it to Virginia, to one of the places. So, when writing this history, it was an adventure. I learned what Dunedin was like in the early days, the first pioneers who came here and the early settlers who established homes, their hardships, how they managed to feed their families, and how they formed a community. Two interesting observations I discovered. It has always been important for Dunedin residents to make sure their children had activities to keep them busy and recreation and sports to keep them active. And the women of Dunedin were active participants in making the community better. Individual women, women's church groups, women's community groups help people of all ages who needed assistance both in Dunedin and outside the community. So I believe the women really, when they needed to do the road, they'd have a bake sale and they'd just call everybody, and they had a way of getting a hold of people. So they really did help the community become what it is. And part of the title I have here is about creating a caring community, because it is a caring community. So, any questions?
Thank you for sharing all that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Some things I do know, and I put some things together from, the book with
Yeah. Yes.
And Dr. Henker was their physician, and Henry took Catherine to see him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
There's that. Yeah, that's neat. That's neat. I think I have one more slide. Oh, a coming attraction. I'm now working on the Belleville Biltmore Hotel, the history, how it became, all the history of the hotel, and then how it ended up having to be the Belleville Inn. So I am working on this little by little. So this may be coming. I don't know if I'm going to publish it or not, but I'm having fun writing it and finding out the history. And there's some things too. There was a casino near there, and that's where the Trinity was before they came to the Fenway. So I thought that was kind of interesting that there was that combination. So, but thank you. I appreciate it. I hope everybody learned a little something. And Alex, I appreciate coming today. So.